Psalm 42 verses 1 through 4 says, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, 'Where is your God?' These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng." These verses from Psalm 42 represent some of the Bible's most beautiful poetry. We have the psalmist describing his need for God. He says that he thirsts for the living God. He says that he pants for God the way a deer pants for streams of water. This paints kind of an unusual picture, but it's a vivid one, and I think it's clear exactly what the psalmist is trying to say here. And then after describing his need for God, the psalmist goes on to talk about his separation from God that he's experiencing, and it's heartbreaking for him. He says he's crying day and night, and his neighbors are taunting him. Don't you just love that part? And then he goes on to describe a snapshot of memory from happier times. He recounts traveling to the temple with God protecting his steps, and how even the trip to the house of worship was a celebration. He was traveling with a throng of people, he said, who were shouting for joy and shouting praises to God. We're really seeing quite a picture being painted, aren't we? I remember the first time that I really read this psalm. I probably went through it a time or two before, but nothing really landed on me going through this until about 10 years ago when I was really reading through it for the first time. And I read through these verses and I sat back and I thought about what was going on in there. And then it really cut me to the heart, specifically related to the last part. When he talks about joining that festive throng on the way to the house of the Lord, I could see why the psalmist was lamenting being far from those days when he used to do that. And I thought about my own life and realized that I should probably be lamenting too. Now, my situation was completely different than the one the psalmist was in for a whole lot of reasons, but I did see a parallel there, though, especially when I thought through my own journey to church every Sunday morning. And I'm not sure that it looked like anything close to what was being described in Psalm 42, and that was a pretty sad realization for me. At the time, we only lived about 5 minutes away from where we were going to church, and if there were sidewalks and if there was a traffic light across the busy street, we probably just would have walked, but it was the suburbs, and so we drove. And honestly, with 3 little kids, I think it took us more time to get in the car and to get ready to go than it took to actually get there. So despite being just a mile away, or probably even less than that, we were pretty much late to church every single week. Every week was the same. We'd rushed getting everybody dressed and get everybody ready to go. We'd rush getting children buckled and outfitted with bottles or sippy cups, Cheerios or whatever else was needed. And where is the diaper bag anyway? Who knows? We were rushed, it was loud, everything was a big hurry. And when we finally got to the parking lot at church, we'd have to park in the back because there weren't many spaces left. And then we'd yank the kids out of the car and we'd have to prod them to move faster to get into the church. And we'd drop them off in the nursery or wherever it was they were supposed to go. And then we'd sneak into the back of the sanctuary and grab a seat in the back because that was pretty much all that was left. And probably the first hymn was even playing by then. So we can understand here, looking at that, it's clear to see that our experience in going to church back then was not festive at all. It was absolute chaos. And reading this psalm that day was a real gut check for me. Here was this psalmist going to worship, and he was so prepared and fired up about the opportunity to worship God that the celebration began even before the commute. And it wasn't just him, it was everyone else that was headed that way too. It was not lost on me that Psalm 42 did not describe my situation. And listen, part of that's my fault and part of that wasn't. We all know that the attitude from Psalm 42 has never described New Jersey traffic. New Jersey traffic can be a throng, but it's never a festive throng. But that part I didn't have any control over, right? But I did have control over my part of the day. And so my wife and I made a conscious effort to change our procession to church on Sunday mornings. And I don't know that we ever fully matched the zeal described in Psalm 42, but I think we did improve greatly. And going to church then became much more of a celebratory thing for us. And here's why that's important. If we're going to do church properly, we need to be in the right frame of mind when we get to church. And all this really comes down to the right reasons for going to church in the first place. You've got to ask yourself, am I going to church to get fed? Am I going to get something from me? And if the answer is yes, then arriving in a chaotic fashion really doesn't matter. So yes, it may have been chaotic. You might have missed the first hymn, but there's going to be 3 or 4 more. So now you're ready to receive. You're there. So it's no problem arriving in a chaotic situation like that. Or maybe you're going to church for the social aspect of things. And here too, I think it's still okay to arrive in a sea of chaos. Maybe you missed some fellowship time before the service, but there's more time to fellowship after, so you really haven't missed out, right? But what if the purpose of going to church is for us to glorify and honor God? Well, if that's the case, and it is, by the way, then we need to be in the right frame of mind to do that. I'd like to challenge you to think through the beginning of Psalm 42 and meditate on that this week and ask yourself, what does your procession to church look like on Sunday morning? Does it look like the procession of my family 10 years ago when we were falling short? Are you too rushed and too busy on Sunday morning to really prepare yourself to worship and glorify God when you get to His church? Do you prepare for church at all, or do you just show up there? Please don't misunderstand me. It is much better for you to show up to church unprepared than to not show up at all, but there's still a better way of doing things. If you're not properly approaching Sunday morning, then you can't be as effective in glorifying and honoring God as you would be if you started off your day right. That's just a simple truth. A little bit of planning and some extra purpose can go a long way toward making your Sunday morning look a lot more like the one that Psalm 42 was fondly remembering. And what a wonderful thing that would be. I hope this has been helpful. Hope it's been interesting. And until next time, Lord willing, there is a next time. May God bless you and your family.